Sonic, the heart of your system.
I'm the Award Kit Guru. In one of our videos from CES only last month, I mentioned in conversation with Luke that I hadn't reviewed a laptop in about 6 months, and lo and behold, I've got two of the things, so there you go. Thing is, these two MSIs both use Intel 9th gen CPUs, and yes, we're still waiting for 10th gen. I'm starting to hear rumours that 10th gen may be coming soon. So these are not new laptops, these are last year's models, 2019 models. Nonetheless, they serve well as a refresh of the current state of play with laptops as we head towards those elusive 10th gens. And to be absolutely crystal clear, I'm talking about 45 watt gaming laptop parts, not Ice Lake. So these are Coffee Lake. We're going to be going towards Comet Lake in laptops and also on the desktop. That's my guess at any rate. So we're still talking 14 nanometer. We're not talking radical changes. So these laptops, they look different to each other. As you'll see in the B-roll, when I pulled the covers off, they are so similar. The processors are the same, the chassis are basically the same, the cooling systems are the same, the batteries are the same, the screen size 15.6 inches in both cases, resolution 1920 by 1080, so that's the same. The bezels are very thin. There are some aesthetic differences in terms of the lids, for example, but whatever, purely cosmetic. The keyboards, there are some differences. So this is red per key lighting, these are full RGB. This panel here has a bit of a scallop to it, but they are basically the same, apart from some little tweaks here and there. The layout of the ports and connectors is the same, and I'm not mad keen on the positioning of the USB ports. To my mind, they're too close to the front of the laptop, which means if you plug in a heftier dongle or an external drive or some such, they kind of get in my way. It's not the end of the world, it's just not the way I'd choose to do things. The processors, in both cases, Core i7 9750H, so that's a 6-core 12-thread part. It's possible to buy a version of this GE65 that has an 8-core Core i9 9880H. That model costs a few £100 more than this, about £400 extra. I'm sure there are other things beside the change in processor. Inside the two laptops, as you'll see in the B-roll, the storage is different. So the cheaper model, the GL, has a 256GB M.2 SSD, and it also has a 1TB hard drive, whereas the more expensive GE is SSD only. That is a 1TB SSD, and so it goes on. The points of differentiation between these two laptops, not enormous, apart from in the graphics department. There it's really significant. The GE is RTX 2070, and although MSI does not spell it out in the spec, we're talking Max Q graphics rather than Max P, so downclocked, lower power, which is what you expect to see in a laptop these days. Nonetheless, I wish to goodness MSI be more straightforward in terms of the specification of their graphics. The graphics in the GL are GTX 1660 Ti. In my testing, I was quite surprised to see that the 1660 Ti graphics can actually power this 1080 panel along quite effectively. So that was very pleasing to see. The restriction in the resolution to 1920 by 1080 means that the 1660 does indeed do a good job. But if you want the proper gaming grunt, yes, the GE with the RTX graphics, that is certainly a cut above. Ports and connectors. The GL has one USB 3.1 Type-C and 3 USB 3.0s. I'm calling them 3.0, 3.1. These days everything is 3.2 Gen 1 or Gen 2, and I find that horribly confusing. So the GL has got one Type-C and then 3 of the same USB 3.0s, whereas the GE has got one 3.1 Type-C, one 3.1 Type-A, and 2 USB 3.0 Type-A's. That's slightly vexing of MSI to do that little nitty-gritty sort of differentiation. Also, the GE has got illuminated USB ports so you can find them in the dark. I mean, it's a useful little feature, but you can put it on that laptop, but not that laptop. I mean, really? That seems a bit, you know. It's a similar story with Wi-Fi. The GL has got Intel Wireless AC 9560 2x2, whereas the GE, which is the mid-range model, has got killer Wi-Fi 6 AX1650. You have to wonder just how large the stock of parts is that MSI has to keep for all these subtle points of differentiation. One common point between the two laptops is the battery. They use the same battery, which is not surprising since they're the same chassis, and it's quite a small battery, 51 watt hours. It's a 6-cell unit. MSI is separating the two laptops in terms of the screen, so they're both 15.6 inch, they're both IPS level. However, the GE, the more expensive model, has a 240Hz panel. In terms of backlight bleeding and so on, no problems with either panel. Neither of them has a glossy finish or any particular clever coating. They're actually very dull, regular screens. When it comes to power bricks, the lower power requirement of the GL means it gets away with this relatively small power brick, whereas the GE has got a hefty, great big 280 watt unit. In terms of portability, even though the laptops themselves weigh in at the same 2.3 kilos, the GL package is lighter because of the smaller power brick. And so it goes on. The points of differentiation are relatively small. When you look inside the chassis and you see things like the GL has a missing M.2 slot, which impinges slightly on the ability to upgrade, but the differences between the two chassis are minor. I'm going to do a little experiment to demonstrate the noise levels of the two laptops running Blender. So we're talking a pure CPU workload. This is the GL65, this is the GE65. You'll note there's a microphone above each of the laptops. My voice is currently going like that, so you can get an idea about the levels. Go. Okay, that's the GE65 finished. Now look at the GL65. Loads to go. And that's the GL65 finished. So GE65 6 minutes 43, GL 7 minutes 20. That was unexpected. Let's run Blender again and see what's going on. Initially the GL65 is boosting to 3.3, 3.2 gigahertz. Over here we're much higher. We're up at 3.8, 3.7 gigahertz. And we know after the initial turbo things will settle down a tad, but even so we're currently at 3.6 and 3.1. So there's a huge difference. Let us look at what is going on in terms of power. And quite frankly, it's all very curious. So the GL, the CPU is currently running at 95 degrees for package, but the power is 42 watts. This is a nominal 45 watt processor. Over here on the GE65, temperature currently is 88. It had indeed been 95. CPU package power, 54.9 watts. Call it 55 in round money. So we're running at 55 watts here, running at 42 watts there. That's a significant difference. And the consequence is an extra 300, 400 megahertz on this processor compared to that, which is 10%. Also worth noting, voltage here, CPU voltage 0.95, 0.97, here 105. So call it 0.95 and 105. The turbos had a chance to settle down. We can see average effective clock 2.93 gigahertz. Over here 3.35 gigahertz. And strange to see that the laptop with the lower clock speed is running hotter than the faster laptop. And that's the GE65 finished. And done. difference. 6 minutes 41, 7 minutes 36. Huge difference. It's crystal clear the CPUs in these two laptops are behaving differently to each other, even though they are identical models on the same chipsets in the same chassis with the same cooling package, actually with the same battery now I come to think about it. So therefore the behavior should be, you would think, identical. I don't think there's a problem with either laptop. I suspect the one has different settings to the other, something buried in the BIOS to do with boost and power. If it's not that, perhaps MSI will respond to the email I sent them over the weekend and explain the error of my ways or point out whatever's gone on, in which case I'll update this review or put a comment below it. But as things stand, I'm not, and you might be surprised to learn this, particularly troubled by my findings, because of course the two laptops are quite different in terms of graphics. It's not just a question of CPUs that differentiate them, the graphics are far more significant. So this laptop is slower than this laptop for a number of reasons. This is something we've been aware of on the desktop with Intel processors for quite some years, which is to do with power. You can sometimes run a processor and it will run as low as 3.7 gigahertz on 95 watts, crank up the power 4.7 gigahertz or even faster than that. The power and the boost time makes all the difference in the world. In this laptop we've seen the difference and it's just over 300 megahertz, which is a solid 10%. But there is more to a laptop, much more to a laptop than the processor. So the chassis themselves are perfectly fine in appearance. The thin bezel around the screen I like. The screens themselves, they're not bad, they're not brilliant, they are different to each other, but they're perfectly okay. The keyboard and mouse units in both laptops, they cause me a certain degree of annoyance. I don't like the clicky mouse buttons, the touchpad works absolutely fine. The layout of the keyboard causes me some vexation. There's no Windows key bottom left, the backspace key is not top right because of the number pad. Things like that, they wind me up a certain amount. The feature about the RGB lighting, whether it's red and only red or whether you have an RGB option, I don't honestly much care. With RGB, I tend to set the keyboard to either white or yellow or possibly turn it off. I don't want an RGB marquee going on when I'm typing. I just don't want that. So RGB, don't much care. If I have RGB, I don't use it, therefore I'm not interested in paying for it. Battery life is okay, but it's nothing special. The battery is physically quite small, but then you've got high power draw going on. Let's face it, if you want maximum battery life, you don't buy a laptop that has gaming graphics or semi-gaming graphics. You buy a thin and light that's running on integrated graphics that doesn't have a huge 6-core processor. Maybe it's a dual core, perhaps a quad core. You cut back on the CPU cores, you cut back on the graphics. Perhaps it has a larger battery as well, and it's a different animal altogether. Unfortunately, these laptops, the battery life does nothing for me. In terms of ports, connectors and connectivity, the GE is perfectly okay. The GL unfortunately has a slightly slower USBs. It bugs me. It cannot surely cost MSI but a few pennies to put proper USB in. Please do that, MSI. Similarly, other points of differentiation. The idea you've got Intel Wi-Fi or killer Wi-Fi. I just want the Wi-Fi to kind of work, and proper Wi-Fi versus slightly slower Wi-Fi. Surely, once again, the difference in money is absolutely minimal. So give us decent Wi-Fis and please just stop messing us around when it comes to things like this. The Dragon Center software, it's got some clever wrinkles to it. The fact that one of the laptops was delivered with the battery saving feature enabled, such that when I plugged it into the mains it wouldn't go above 60%. I did not understand that till MSI explained it to me. That was annoying. So on the one hand, the software has some clever features. On the other hand, the fact it doesn't have a great big flashing thing saying, you do know, don't you, you have to disable this thing here in order for the battery to charge above 60%. You know, there is room for improvement, I think it is safe to say. So overall, both laptops have their merits, they also have their weaknesses. The GL is obviously a lot cheaper, £1,249 SRP, and is on sale now for £1,200. That's still a fair amount of money as laptops go. One that looks quite imposing, it seems surprisingly cheap. And yet I'm unconvinced by it. It's not good enough. It's okay, but it is a budget laptop that looks like it's giving you a huge amount for your money, and instead it's giving you a fair amount for your money. The idea of a laptop that isn't actually an out-and-out gamer, obviously that's fine, in which case why have a proper graphics chip in it? If you didn't have the graphics chip and you could make it even smaller for one thing, it wouldn't be as rackety when it's working hard for another thing, it could be physically smaller. So if you want a thin and light, this is obviously not that. So the GL for me, it ticks a number of boxes, but it doesn't wow me. By contrast, the GE65, the mid-range laptop, yes, it can storm along. Those RTX graphics drive the 1080 panel, no problem. It can game. If you want a game on the move, ideally near a plug socket, obviously, this laptop can do that. The price, £2,099 is the list price, £1,799 it is available for, so £300 off. Clearly that tells us that the next gen is coming soon. We obviously have to assume the next gen will be better. Clearly it will look fresher, it will look younger, it'll be 10th gen plus whatever graphics. As to whether it is actually a step on, that's a different question. After all, this processor is not the top of the heap. It is a 6-core rather than an 8-core, so when the next gen comes, and let's assume the next gen runs up to 10 cores, and that's just an assumption, then there will be a skew further down the stack, which will be 8 or 6, probably not 4 cores, just as this is not the top of the heap. So therefore, the step from this slightly down the stack skew to the next slightly down the stack skew, will it be a huge step? I'm going to hazard a guess not. I'm going to say there'll be a replacement for this laptop in the next few months that will be frankly fairly similar and will doubtless cost £2,100, £2,200, £2,300, about £500 more. Now in that context, this looks quite interesting. It doesn't have the cachet of, say, the Razer Pro. We like that Razer Blade Pro a lot. This, on the other hand, is a compromise. It's a decent laptop that does most of the things that you want for considerably less money. On the other hand, it's still got the clicky mouse buttons, it's got mediocre battery, and the keyboard is a bit wrong. But it's not a bad laptop, so of the two of them, I'm inclined to go for the GE over the GL, despite the fact it costs more. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, head to Kit Guru's shop and buy some merch. I'm Leo Wood of the Kit Guru. These are two laptops from MSI.